and welcome to the channel. This is probably the last video of the year and I've been working real hard to improve the studio infrastructure and my workflows in the video, but I wanted to squeeze in one more sound design for you before we all go on vacation. And based on your good response to the Mr Crowley recreation DAW list and also based on your comments, I wanted to give it a try on Mr Crowley's dive bomb effect. So if you want to give it a try on reproducing this sound on your Hydra, let me show you how I've done it. And I want to save some time also to tell you about this new setup I'm testing today, so I'll talk a little bit about that during the video as well. When I first did the arrangement to recreate this song, and if you haven't seen this video, you can look at the first video here on the card. I have actually patched the aftertouch on the Minimoog to the filter cutoff frequency, allowing me to do a filter sweep instead of the original song sound effect. And by knowing that Don actually used a CS80 on the original recording and that equipment has a similar ribbon to the Hydrasynth, I thought to give it a try by using the ribbon functionalities that we haven't been talking too much on the channel before. So let me know if sound effects is also something that interests you. But today let's start here on the ribbon menu and let's have a look at the parameters that I set up for this sound effect. The first thing you would like to do is to configure your ribbon in theremin mode, and this is what will allow us to create this pitch variation. And in my case here, I set the key span to 6 octaves to give you this big range that we can hear in the original recording. The other important parameter here is to leave the quantize on. And I actually missed some more granularity on the quantize parameter because the feeling I have from the CS80 is that the quantize jumps are much bigger than in the Hydra that has this very sensitive ribbon and very long, which give me much more finesse in the modern synthesizer than Don had it in the Yamaha. But still, it is a very expressive control that will allow you to perform this dive bomb live if you wanted to. So now let's have a look into how this sound is made. Let me get started with you here from the voice menu, and my configurations here are polyphony set to poly. I'm actually using density with a value of 7 and a detune of 32, always trying to recreate that classic synth sound with the analog fill set to 49 and random phase set to on. And what this will do is simulate better the behavior of an analog synth that is always oscillating even when you don't press any keys. And then at the moment you trigger the notes, you might be at any phase of your oscillation wave. My stereo mode here is set to rotate with a stereo width of 42 and the warm mode on again to resemble the sound of vintage analog. I let this sound be very raw, very synth-alike, because in the original recording this sound is very up to the front on the mix, very loud, and it has this stereo effect that we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about our mod matrix here. But before you write in the comments, I've done my own little version here and finished by playing on the low pitch range, whereas in the original recording Don ends up in the high pitch. But performances apart, if we now look here into our mixer, you'll see that this sound was made of 3 oscillators to create that very raw, powerful synth sound of the 70s. However, if we look here into oscillator 1, I'm also making use of a trick from Hydrasynth, because oscillator 1 is set to single mode and set as a sawtooth waveform, slightly detuned here to 8 cents with full key track. But the trick here lies on the Mutant 1 modifier, and this is where I am actually making use of my density parameter that we saw on the voice menu there by using Mutant 1 as a wave stack. And this will create that unison feeling. I set my deafness of the Mutant to 68.9 and the dry wet to 54. But as we seen before, this sound is not only made of one oscillator but three. So if we have a look here into oscillator 2, what we have here, it's also a single waveform set to saw, but this time with an octave detune here with -12 semitones to get that bass sound, and a slight detune to create the phasing effect, set to -3 cents here with full key track. What I'm trying to reproduce here is the sound of that pipe organ that in my case, in my arrangement, I've used the OB6 to reproduce, and what creates the basis of the organ effect is actually to use different oscillators tuned to different octaves. So that is why my oscillator 2 here is set one octave below. So now let's have a look into oscillator 3. And this will be also a single wave oscillator set to sawtooth -12 semitones here and a slight bigger detune of -7 cents. However, if we look at the mixer here, we'll see that I have mixed in differently the three sounds, being oscillator 1 my main sound source on full volume of 128, whereas oscillator 2 has a volume of 74, and oscillator 3 is only contributing with that dissonance or vibration that you create by detuning some cents here and there. And that is why oscillator 3 has its volume set to 57.5, very low volume there, just to create that thickness in the sound, but also oscillation due to the slight detuning between the different oscillators. So now if we continue here into our signal chain, you will notice that this sound is actually unfiltered. So no filtering, neither on filter 1 here nor filter 2 there. And again, this is because I wanted this sound to cut through the mix, to be very loud, so I'm leaving all the frequencies to roar without any filtering there. A lot because I consider this a sound effect more than a real piece of the arrangement. If we look here at the amplifier, nothing fancy there either. Nothing special about my envelopes. It is just the trigger. But what I spent some time on was actually on my pre-effects there. I have applied the rotary effect to contribute even more for that oscillation of the sound created by the dissonances between the octaves in our oscillators, and also giving some vintage flavor to it. So my setup here is based on Rotary 2 preset with a low speed of 0.26 Hz, a high speed of 0.9 Hz, a low depth of 27, high depth of 29, low and high set to 0, and a dry wet set to 50. The other thing that I worked here on my signal chain was actually reverberation. And for that one, I have chosen one of my favorite Hydra reverb sounds, which is the cloud, set with a pre-delay of 5.1 milliseconds, a time of 1.35 seconds, a tone set to 39.5, high damp at 96, low damp at 0, and a dry wet set to 62.9. And what the reverb is giving me here, it's a little bit more space to not have it so punchy in front of all my mix. Last but not least, here in the signal chain, I have applied post effects just to do an extra equalization. So I applied EQ based on a smile preset, but I customized the values to low gain of about 8.2 decibels, a high gain of 11 decibels, mid gain set to 6 dB, a shower low set to 470 Hz, and my shower high to the 1008. Dry wet set to 70.8%, and basically this is it in terms of the signal chain for this sound design. But you know that the magic happens when we start to apply modulation here and patch all the different sounds, and this is actually where I applied the stereo effect to the dive bomb. This is not exactly what we hear in the original recording, in which I believe that the panning of stereo might have happened in post-production. But again, this is a DAW-less inspired arrangement, for which I thought, why not to create a stereo panning effect on the synth itself, so that you could play this live and DAW-less. So let's have a look at my routings here. I have patched the ribbon absolute value to my mixer oscillator 1 pan, and what this will do is that when I go high in pitch, you see that the whole sound moves to the left on the stereo spectrum, and the positive value here also means that when I go down in pitch, the opposite happens. The sound concentrates on the right side of the stereo spectrum. So this is the effect I'm trying to create here by connecting the ribbon absolute position to the panning of oscillator 1. But since this sound is constituted of 3 oscillators, we also need to apply the pan effect to the oscillators 2 and 3. And my values here has been positive 64 for oscillator 2 and positive 63.8 for oscillator 3, and the slight differences there were meant to create even more space between the 3 sound sources there to create this widespread stereo effect that almost feels like muting one of the ears while doing the dive bomb. Even more if you go on the extremities of the ribbon there, since the value for the panning will be higher. But this is not all. This is everything that I've done on the synth here, but I must confess I have cheated a little bit with a trick in post-production. But before I tell you what I've done there, let me tell you a little bit about the upgrades I'm trying to do on the studio. I know that many of you are new to the channel, but for those of you that have been following me, I used to spend a lot of time on editing and post-production of my videos, and part of it is because I have this setup where I want to show you the bigger picture but also go into details of our sound design in specific areas of the synth, having to show values on the synth screen, or in the case of the Hydrasynth here, all the signal chain path. And there is a lot of work to do on camera movement that I tend to do in editing. So what I'm trying to upgrade here in the channel is to make use of these pan, tilt and zoom type of camera, where I can actually place the camera on a single spot but still control it so that you can see all the details. My initial intention was to actually also try out commercial partnerships for 2025, since this is a very small channel. But despite I've been very impressed by the price range and the workflow of this camera, the very first unit that I bought actually had a technical problem and I had to return it. OBSBot were super good in supporting me in the process, and they actually returned me a brand new camera, which I am intending to use as my main camera for the channel from now on. But before I put any affiliate links in the description, I'll make sure I will record a few more videos with this camera so that I recommend you something with quality. But I must say, I'm really glad with the workflow that this camera gives me, this possibility of showing you details on different parts of the synth and maybe saving me a lot of time in post-production. And for this price range, this was the best option in the market I could find that could give me all these functionalities. Plus the fact that the camera can be controlled remotely, so that I can do this type of detail while explaining to you and controlling the camera with the other hand. Well, that's it for a small channel. This is a one-man army show, so I need all the help I can get. Coming back to our post-production trick here, which was what I used to bring the introduction of this video for you, what I actually did was to take the exact same performance I did on the first take, duplicate the soundtrack, but leaving a tiny space between the first take and its duplicate. And what this will give me essentially is this delay effect that will create even more thick sound. I do believe that in the original recording they have recorded twice, because you never make the performance exactly on the same time. But this trick of moving the exact same soundtrack slightly forward or backwards in time will give you the thickness of a duplicate track. This is widely used in the vocals, for instance. Well, I know this was a short video, but I wanted to share with you that I'm working hard on improving the studio and the quality of the videos for you without losing our main thread here around sound design. So thank you for your comments. I also was missing the dive bomb in the first recording. I wanted to give it a try with Hydra. This was a very simple patch. You saw there only 3 oscillators, 1 mutant to thicken in the sound, the mixing of the 3 sound sources, no filtering, no fancy envelopes, jumping straight into the rotary effect, simple reverb there, and an EQ to help me out while mixing this sound. So very simple sound effect that has at its core the interaction with the ribbon as a theremin. I hope you enjoyed it. I wish you all good holidays, and I hope to come back with more content for you in 2025. Let me know in the comments if you are interested in content production and more of the production side of the sound design as well. I'll bring some more content around it for next year, so stay tuned. And as always, thanks for watching.